Business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Cheatham, giving you the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of change. Kyler, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, as well as all the audio podcast platforms. So be sure to check us out, subscribe to our podcast and or YouTube channels to get updates on this podcast, as well as other content that we put out daily. We've got an exciting show for you today. We're going to cover really a packed show, a lot of different topics. We're going to talk about some research that you've uncovered, Kyler, related to digital transformation strategies at the executive level, as far as leading culture, the business climate in general, agility, as well as even the Olympics. You're gonna cover there as well. So that should be some good hot topics we'll do in the opening segment here. So that'll be some interesting stuff. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about some of that stuff, and I have no idea what you're going to say about it. So we'll kind of learn together on that front here. And then our main guest here today, or our first guest on the show, I should say, is Tim Creasey, who's the Chief Innovation Officer for Prosci. And I'm really excited to have him on the show. I've been trying to get him on the show now for some time. So we finally were able to get him on our podcast, and he's a really good thought leader in the change management and transformation space. If you're not familiar with Prosci, its training program and its certification, it's really sort of a gold standard for getting certified and getting trained and brushed up on what change is and how to affect change within an organization. And he's the Chief Innovation Officer who's at the forefront of their training programs and their research and whatnot. So I thought, what better person to have on the show to talk about some emerging trends in change management. So Tim will be on the show talking about the future of organizational change management. So we'll kind of look at where we're at today and what's changing in the world of change and change management. And really excited for that conversation. Should be a great one. And then we'll also have Adam Cheatham on the show, who's a Director of Strategy and Transformation at Third Stage Consulting. He'll be on the show talking about system and technology integration and some of the considerations to keep in mind there. So those are the exciting topics we've got for you today. But before we get to our guests, what are some of these what are some of these hot topics in the research that you've uncovered here that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode?
Yeah, definitely. So PwC recently did an overall survey of executives that found that 70% of business leaders actually believe that COVID-19 the COVID-19 pandemic, will actually lead to forced transformations, which we already kind of knew. But the fact is 60% of say digital transformations will be their most critical growth driver in 2022. And I kind of wanted to share what their growth strategies were, just to get some of your reactions, if that's kind of what you've seen from client conversations or within your network marketplace as well. So their number one strategy is prioritizing operating model, cloud, and data in 2022. And the number one actual tactic is redefining IT strategy and operating model to be more agile. So I wanted to get your reaction to that, to think about, a lot of people and organizations aren't going back to a traditional quote unquote work environment and having to migrate from maybe an on-premise option due to more hybrid work and migrating to a cloud solution. Is that something that you've seen as far as agility? Is that what you would define as agility, as kind of moving to that cloud model?
Yeah, it is. And you're sort of getting it, call it the base level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as it relates to agility. And that is, you have a pandemic, global pandemic, you're forced to have a certain amount of people that are working remotely for a certain amount of time. And that sort of exposes the limitations of your on-prem systems, and therefore you have to move off the on-premise solutions into the cloud in many cases. But if you sort of take it up the hierarchy of needs and think more strategically about, well, how else could we be enabling the sort of agility, flexibility within the cloud, then you start thinking about supply chain issues that organizations are having right now, and how the cloud can help enable better visibility, better analytics into the supply chain. And then you work your way even further up and realize that there's Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, manufacturing and shop floor automation, that you're capturing and collecting all this data on the shop floor, and even with your customers through e-commerce and whatnot. You have all these different data sources that you don't know what to do with the data, or you're not able to do anything with the data with your on-premise systems. But by using the cloud, you're going to be able to deploy different uses for that technology in that data, and being able to sort of tie that all together. So I think what you're highlighting is that COVID sort of disrupted and underscored the need for change. But now organizations are realizing, okay, we know we need to change. Now what else can we get out of this overall transformation? And that's, those second two buckets that I was talking about.
Absolutely. And so do you feel like the cloud is always kind of the best solution for a company that is going to kind of revise their target operating model, if you will, to focus on remote work? Does that always mean that the cloud is the best option for them?
Not always. I mean, it's commonly the best option. I think the key is understanding the different nuances of cloud, understanding that you have hybrid models that allow you to have sort of an on-premise feel to your technology, but you can have someone else host it and manage the infrastructure and whatnot. So in other words, cloud doesn't necessarily need to mean multi-tenant SaaS-based solutions that are less flexible and less agile than some cloud solutions. At least in terms of changing workflows and changing functionality. It still addresses some of the agility of reporting and analytics and data integration that I mentioned. And I know Adam will be on later talking about integration and system integration as well. So the cloud does enable that, I'd say, in a more standard or an easier way. I just think, again, it's just like any trend or buzzword in the industry. You really just, you want to be aware of it, mindful of the fact that most organizations are going to the cloud, most vendors are going to the cloud. Doesn't mean you should, but you may want to. And if for some reason you find that there's some sort of core competitive advantage that you're just not going to get in the cloud, and the only way you're going to get that or retain that is with on-premise solutions, then by all means stick to your on-premise solutions. No one's forcing you to go to the cloud. The vendors are trying to. The industry is trying to get you to change. They're trying to force you to. Doesn't mean you should, though, necessarily, although I would say that most organizations are sort of gravitating in that direction.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, it's not an all or nothing thing. There are some hybrid options for companies that may not be ready to go, the full software as a subscription option. But there are options that which is a main, thesis of our conversations all the time. It really should be based on the needs of the organization, not what the vendor kind of wants to put you in a certain bucket, type of thing. So I think that's interesting. Yeah. That feedback for sure. So
especially if you think about organizations that have operations that are in remote locations, or they don't have reliable infrastructure, and we deal with a lot of multinational clients in Africa and parts of Europe and the Middle East and Latin America, even North America, where there's rural areas with infrastructure limitations. So I think having recognizing that there's a downside risk of being in the cloud when you have those sort of operations, that's something else you have to consider as well.
Certainly, absolutely. And speaking of kind of business strategies for 2022, I found another research report that looked at all of the different evolutions of change management, or basically organizational structure, and how businesses can transition most effectively. And I wanted to read you a quote from this study. Specifically, it says, traditionally, change management involves selling the change to the employees who will be affected by it. In 2022, that is the wrong way around. Your people need to be active participants in designing the change needed. And I thought that was interesting, because a lot of times we don't think about people as the decision makers. We think about the executives make the decision, or whomever the department head is, that there needs to be a new technology or process or what have you. And then the people might be involved in designing what exactly that process looks like, but they're not the main decision makers there. And this study is really saying that that's really how they should be viewed at this point as kind of the employee business leader relationship.
Yeah, and I think I have kind of a mixed reaction to that. I think on one hand, I think that that's in some ways the way it should have always been. I mean, the pandemic itself, the fact that we're in the 2020s doesn't really change that. I mean, you could have said the same thing 20 years ago and it would have been true that you want to involve people in the decision making and making them part of the process. And that buy-in and ownership more than anything is going to get people excited and get you past some of that resistance to change and change barriers that most organizations face. On the other hand, there is such a thing as taking that concept too far to where the people on the front lines that you're trying to include in the process may be flying blind or shooting in the dark if they don't have a clear direction from leadership on what the organization is trying to do strategically and how this transformation is meant to enable that strategic direction. So it's sort of a mix. You need that buy-in that you're talking about. You've always needed it. It's just, okay, I guess you have more of an excuse to need it now that we're in sort of a not survival mode, but we've gone through a big crisis. A lot of organizations have gone through crisis, and now we're sort of rallying the troops to get them more involved in solving the problem. But on the other hand, you still need that. There's no substitute for that. That clear strategic direction, that clear vision, the clear goals and objectives in the way this transformation is going to support that. And that sort of gives you the guardrails or the parameters that then, yes, you can go do the things you just mentioned, which is then you get people bought into owning and making decisions. But it has to fit within that direction. You don't want them going off in a totally different direction because that misalignment will completely undercut and undermine the benefit of getting that buy-in, of getting people involved.
Yeah, that is a great point of, at some point there has to be that executive alignment and direction. And hopefully, that change, or at least that feedback for change, has been surfaced throughout the organization from the front lines to being, received by the executive team. So that's a great point. Another piece of this study that I wanted to share that I found interesting was the idea of this nudge technology that changes behavior and workflow. So we have these new technologies, or newer, like Cultivate, Culture Amp, Change Queue, Microsoft Viva, and base Workday Everywhere, which we know Workday well, obviously, in Microsoft. And they make these small behavior changes easy and in turn have a really big impact on, say, end user adoption or changing in a more positive way. And I wanted to get your just feedback on kind of that intelligent software that can pick up employee or workforce behavior signals.
Yeah, in what way? In what kind of signals? Are you talking about like Slack and things like that that'll pick up those signals, or are you talking about the other ones you just mentioned?
These ones I think are a bit different than Slack. They provide kind of ongoing feedback regarding the flow of work. So are they reflecting company values? How are they managing their time effectively? So it's almost kind of like, I would call it a watchdog software, not that harsh, right? But almost helping employees optimize how they go about their, I know, big brother, how they go about their overall workflow, and then giving them positive opportunities to change, thus having a big impact on the efficiency of the overall organization.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not familiar with that sort of technology. It's amazing to me how many different technologies are out there to address all these different components of change and process improvement, all that stuff. And that's an area that's new to me. So, like much of the audience, I'm learning with you here. So it's certainly fascinating. I could see a definite role for that type of technology for sure.
Absolutely, and kind of transitioning to another research study. I've just been studying all week long for our audience here by O.C. Tanner Institute. Kind of talks about what is needed for a culture change and how our current labor shortage is really affecting business culture. So, for example, companies that experience layoffs or furloughs throughout the pandemic experienced a 91% decrease in net promoter score, 57% increase in disengagement, and a 42% increase in tense workplace atmosphere. So 75% of those polled within these specific companies felt as though the organization was unprepared. So we see kind of this huge number of almost dissatisfied employees in this great resignation type of climate that we're in right now. So how can businesses that had to go through this unfortunate furloughing or let go layoff process because of the current business climate, whether they experience a huge decrease in sales, how can they build up that culture again with their existing workforce and create more trust, in your opinion?
Well, I think I know this is not a popular comment, and it sort of runs counter to where a lot of the world is right now. But I do think that we sort of have overcorrected a bit, partly because we've had to, based on government regulations and people's health concerns and whatnot. But I think we've overcorrected and gone too far down the path of remote collaboration. And for example, having Microsoft Teams meetings and Zoom meetings rather than in-person meetings. Now, on one hand, we've proven that we can collaborate, we can be effective remotely. We don't necessarily need to all be in the same room. We don't, if we're a multinational organization, we don't all need to fly to different countries to meet, to have that same level of effectiveness. But when we do that as a mutually exclusive solution without peppering in that human interaction, that in-person human interaction, you do lose a lot, and you lose a lot of cultural aspects and nuances of your organization. In fact, that's something that I've struggled with as a leader with Third Stage, is because we are so collaborative as an organization, and culture is so important to me personally, that during the pandemic, when we let our office lease lapse, for example, we went about a year without an office, and we worked entirely remotely. We tried to get together every so often, but it's hard because there are always going to be a subset of people that are still concerned about health and safety, and maybe they're always going to be concerned about health and safety. There's a certain subset of people that believe strongly in this whole remote work model. But to build a strong culture and to create that stickiness and that engagement and that feeling of belonging, I really don't think you can do that solely with remote technologies and remote collaboration. So I think that's one thing that is controversial. Is I'd say, challenge yourselves to be in person, if you can, especially now that governments throughout the world are easing up. In many parts of the world, they've already eased up, and we deal with a lot of clients throughout the world, including in the United States, where I'd say it's been a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, on the limitations, but certainly not as aggressive as other parts of the world. But there are certain parts of the world where a year ago they were already back to normal collaboration, and the waves of COVID, the pandemic, sort of came and went, and they sort of stuck with it. Not saying that's right or wrong, but I think that more organizations need to think that way. I don't think we need to go back to 8 to 5, Monday through Friday in the office, but it's okay to have some sort of a hybrid. And I think as a leader in an organization, you sort of need to push for that, and that's what's going to create that culture of engagement and stickiness and belonging within an organization.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we Adam, my husband, who works at Third Stage as well, were in the office yesterday, and as we were leaving, we are totally opposites when it comes to introvert versus extrovert. And I'm like, that was so fun. I love talking to everyone. He's like, I like seeing everyone, but man, that's way too much socialization for me. So
That's actually how I am deep down too. I'm an introvert too, but I know I have to overcome that or work past that, in the name of building that culture and building that engagement with employees. Yeah,
definitely. Well, my last hot topic is kind of a fun one, talking about the high tech of the Olympics. And it kind of made me laugh because Adam's birthday was a few weeks ago, and we went to stay at a hotel, and we couldn't figure out how to work the high tech elevators. So it made me we don't get out much. We have young kids. And so the elevator, you had to scan the key and push where you were going before you got into the elevator. And then the elevator would just take you up to the floor. And we got lost multiple times. So I was kind of laughing about these new technologies at the Beijing Olympics, just because they are very innovative, and people are kind of like, whoa, a lot of it is because of the risk of COVID, especially in that area. So, for example, journalists, they're in the bubble, right? But they can't talk to any of the athletes or interact with them. So they have a ton of downtime. So what the Olympic Association has done is put these sleeping pods in everywhere around the bubble. And so basically it's a very interesting innovation that is a box that you can go in and have a zero gravity sleep experience. So you can kind of, I guess since you have nothing to do, you'll just be, sleeping all over the place. But if I can explain it in a podcast format, it's a clear wall. So if you were walking by, you could easily see someone just sleeping in there or whatever they're doing in there. And so it's an interesting design, but it's all innovated to make sure that you get the best sleep. And again, as a mom to 2 toddlers, that just really sounds like a vacation to me.
Sounds magical.
Yeah. But some other innovations they've done is just the trains model that only the athletes and the journalists can get on the trains, the coaches and those types of things. So lots of emerging technologies when it comes to using AI for anyone that makes your food is a robot. And say you're at, the hotel bar, they're a robot too. So it's very interesting in the fact that they've kind of activated a lot of these no contact technologies that we've been talking about within the industry and are kind of piloting those at the Olympic Games.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of most of that technology other than the part where you swipe the elevator key to go up the elevator.
Well, I'm glad you've heard of that because we obviously did not.
Well, just wait till your kids are older, by the way. I mean, your kids are pretty young.
Yeah.
When your kids are like my kids' age, or they're 12 and 15, you're just completely over your head with technology, and they know everything about technology, and it's pretty fascinating how quickly they learn. So enjoy it while you can, to where you for the most part, a little bit more than your kids, because eventually that'll go away. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I hadn't been aware of that, but it's just a good reminder. One of the questions you asked me, I think last week or maybe 2 weeks ago in this podcast, was how much do you think technology will permeate our lives? And you sort of answer that question in another way by giving these examples of ways that a lot of us have never thought of before.
Right. Well, I think it's a great segue into Tim and your interview with him, and how we really need to kind of humanize these innovations. They are very cool, right? But we have to also remember the human nature and just the overall human experience. So this is one of my favorite live streams that you've ever done. Obviously, our audience loved it too. And again, as I said last week, if you haven't joined one of the live streams on Tuesday mornings that Eric does on all of his social channels, it's so interesting to hear the audience feedback. And fun to be involved in that. So I highly recommend joining live if you're able to at some point. Yeah,
they're fun to do, and you get a lot of good audience participation and questions. And he's very active in social media, and he's very well respected in the industry too. He's sort of I don't want to call him a god, but he's sort of a guru, certainly a leader within the space. And in the company itself, Prosci as an organization is really groundbreaking in that they've helped bring a lot of attention in underscoring the need for change. And not only that, but they've also created a framework and sort of training and empowering consultants and also organizations themselves to manage change in a structured way. So it becomes a little bit less of a nebulous, touchy-feely thing and becomes more of a structured, pragmatic sort of a thing. And that's what I really like about it is it's, we'll talk about this, but it was created by an engineer. An engineer founded the company, which is pretty interesting to me. So it has certainly the soft side of change management, but it's got that engineering rigor that's been added to it, which will be fascinating. And he is, I've talked to Tim before on multiple occasions, and he's their chief innovation officer, and he's also I'd say he's very logical. He's compared to most change people, he's got this very logical side to him, and he certainly infuses call it the intangible or the soft side of change in that as well. But it'd be fascinating to have him on the show here finally after many attempts, and we'll get him here as soon as we take a quick break. We'll be right back with Tim Creasey, who is the Chief Innovation Officer of Prosci. So we'll be right back after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and you can find new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also find us on all of the audio podcast platforms. So if you're listening on Spotify, Google, Amazon, Apple, wherever you're listening, be sure to check us out, subscribe, leave us a review, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. And this, as I mentioned before, is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, strategy, and change. And speaking of change, I'm excited for our next guest, who is Tim Creasey, Chief Innovation Officer of Prosci. And rather than tell you what Prosci is, rather than tell you what Tim does, I'm going to ask him himself and let him say it in his own words. So with all that being said, Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Excited for the opportunity and enjoy the live stream nature of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be cool to get people's questions here. In fact, we already have a few people mentioning where they're from today. One who is on a treadmill in Boston. So Robert on LinkedIn is watching on a treadmill in Boston. So good to have the audience here today. So I guess I actually
got to live in Boston from 2003 to 2005, which were two fantastic years to get to live in Boston for sure.
Yeah. Why? It was something to do with the Patriots or?
The Red Sox, Patriots, Red Sox, Patriots. It was a crazy couple of years for sure.
Yeah. And now it comes full circle with Tom Brady retiring, and I'm sure that place in your heart, having lived there for some time.
Oh no, I was born and raised in Colorado, so the three most important teams to me are the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos. So I don't mind seeing the greatest of all time right off into the sunset. So.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to be a Broncos fan and a Tom Brady fan at the same time. And
yeah, definitely not.
You and I are both from Colorado, so we share that connection as well. And it's funny what a small world this is. We're both in the world of change and business transformation and things like that, but yet we're both from Colorado too. So that's a good coincidence. So just to start, maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and also about Prosci for people that don't know what Prosci is. Maybe you could describe both yourself and the organization, if you don't mind.
Yeah, most certainly. So I'm Tim Creasey, Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci. I'll start with Prosci. It's an organization who's dedicated to help individuals and organizations build their own change capability so they can deliver more successful change outcomes. Really based in this notion that every change has a technical side and a people side. And we usually do a tremendous job investing time and energy and effort in the technical side, and we leave the people side to chance. And so Prosci as an organization has built out a discipline, tool set, methodology, training suite to help organizations conquer the challenges of change through the people that make up the organization. So that's Prosci. We serve the change practitioner community, certainly, which I think would be a lot of the folks, that come to your podcast, but we also go deep into organizations, realizing that leaders have a role in driving successful change. People managers have a role in driving successful change. We need project teams to speak the language of adoption and usage. So that's the way we support our clients as they grow kind of institutional organizational muscle and change. And then, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer. So I just celebrated 21 years with the firm about a week ago. And I kind of steer the innovation, really getting out in front of the community to talk about the challenges of change are unlockable with and through our people. I kind of have a funny role, Eric, right? Both in terms of really diving into the discipline, really taking something like the change practitioner competency model and really blowing it out as a way for practitioners to develop themselves, And I go speak at conferences where the audience has never even heard the phrase change management, just to help bring that mindset shift that successful change requires our people, and there's things that we can do about it to support our people through the change journeys that we ask them to take. So I kind of play on both of those ends in this role as the Chief Innovation Officer. It's been a wild journey, right? I was employee 9, and then we shrunk to about 3. And now we have a division that's called RPM that runs research, product, and marketing. And so to have a whole group of folks that are steering that part of the organization, it's really freed me up to get to do things like these podcasts.
Yeah, and really get the message out there about something that's so important. It's such an important discipline. And, Prosci fascinates me because, when I started off doing change management consulting back in the late 90s, there wasn't any formal training program. I mean, you had like Cotter and, some of the thought leaders in the change management space that had, more of that academic thought leadership. But as far as like a certified program that you can get certified in this discipline, that it didn't really exist before.
Yeah, and we were founded by Jeff Hyatt. He was an engineer, and I, say the way Prosci got founded was an insatiably curious engineer started asking the question, why do some projects succeed and others not?
Interesting.
I mean, that was the crux of the question. The very first big detractor that he found when he started to really investigate that question was failing to get the adoption and usage we need of the solution from the people who, it's not that the buttons didn't work. It's that we didn't help our people bring that solution to life in the way they do their day-to-day jobs. And so that was over 25 years ago, right? That this curious engineer spots the people side of change as the challenge he wants to investigate and help others unlock through actionable, practical, accessible methodologies and tools. And so, yeah, that was kind of the genesis. But you're right, in the early 90s, late 90s, right? It's starting to hit the business lexicon. We've moved out of just kind of trying to better understand people and how human beings move through change. And people like Todd Jick and Cotter and Connor and even Spencer Johnson at the end of the 90s really started to put the people side of change onto the lexicon, right? That it's something we need to bring intentionality to if we want to achieve the results and outcomes of the changes we're investing in. And that's really where Prosci stepped in to really bring the research to the table and say, can we work with practitioners to understand what worked, what didn't, and what you would do differently next time? And they really start to build out the breadth and depth of this discipline that we call change management over the last 20 years.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I had no idea that it was an engineer that founded Prosci, which I find fascinating because I think that's one of the problems with change management, or historically had been one of the problems, is it's so touchy-feely. It's sort of this vague, nebulous term, but you add that engineering discipline with more of a structured approach. That seems to be what Prosci is. So it makes sense that an engineer started it. I just didn't know that's how the origin was.
And I think that's why people got drawn to it, right, Eric? Because it threaded the needle between a systemic mechanical approach in view of the organization that the engineer has with business psychology, sociology, anthropology, all of the human components, because we know our organizations are made up with human beings. And so, yeah, I think it's a unique blend of structured intentionality around the human side of our organizations.
Gotcha. Well, I'd be curious to hear from the audience while we're getting going here on the conversation. How many of you have heard of Prosci, and how many of you maybe have taken a Prosci course, or maybe some of you are Prosci certified? I'd love to hear just in the audience if we've got any Prosci certified practitioners, or at least people that have heard of it or somewhat familiar with it. And certainly if you're not familiar with it, that's exactly why we have Tim on the show. So that's no problem either.
You want to hear one other little bit of backstory about the certification?
Yeah.
So 2001 is when we did that first. That's when I joined the firm. We build and released the first methodology as a toolkit, because Jeff envisioned Prosci as a product organization, books and binders, right? Like, this is the very first Prosci research report. There's 2 of them that we know are in existence. It's 30 pages long. The current one's like 4.5 pounds. But he really envisioned the organization being a product organization selling books and binders that captured what we were learning about the people side of change. But people kept coming to us and saying, we need you to train us in this. We need you to train us in this. And so I kept hammering on him. And he came back and set the bar. And I think kudos to Jeff. I think this was a nugget of Prosci's success. He said, we are not going to build a 3-day training program. We're going to build a transformational experience that empowers people to feel like they can tackle a challenge that they never thought they could tackle before. It's not 3 days of lecture. It's a 3-day transformational empowering experience. And if you can design to that, then we'll step into this training space. And this was back in 03, 04. And people who attended those early programs remember the days of chili cook-offs and karaoke up at a dude ranch out, in the mountains of Colorado. But it was around that mindset and tool set shift that was coming from seeing the people side of change as something we could navigate and manage.
Interesting. That's super interesting. I had no idea about the origins. In fact, when you and I first started talking about this interview, I thought you started Prosci just because your name has been so prominent and attached to it for so long. And you started out of college, is that right? Weren't you just out of college or something when you started there?
Yeah, I joined up with Prosci. I was gonna go do a PhD in comparative economics because my background's in political science and economics. And my partner at the time, now wife and mother of my children, was getting a teaching degree. And so I needed to find something to do in northern Colorado for about a year and a half. Until I went and did that PhD. And so sure enough, stepped into Prosci and became fascinated with what I call the microeconomics, right? If macroeconomics is how the economy is working and microeconomics is how a firm makes decisions, what really fascinates me is how Andy, Becky, Charlie, Debbie, Eric, what makes individuals tick? What makes them navigate and make the decisions that they make? And so microeconomics is kind of the academic lens I've kind of layered onto some of the learning that we've been doing for a couple of decades.
Interesting. That's very cool. All right. Thank you, Tim. We're going to take a quick break. I've got a lot more questions for you, as does the audience. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here in the middle of a conversation with Tim Creasey from Prosci talking about the future of change management. Let's cut back to the conversation. Well, just to kind of turn into the audience here, where some of the people are joining from today, we've got Justin from Pittsburgh. Thanks for being here, Justin. Robert is the one on LinkedIn who's watching on a treadmill, which is great multitasking. Talking about leading change, you've got to be able to multitask, and that's a good demonstration of it there. Dubai, we've got a couple people from Denver. So thanks for being here. We've got Ukraine. I won't show and list them all, but there's a global audience here. I know we've got Dubai in here as well. Ghana, Spokane, Washington, UAE again, as well as another one from Denver and Africa as well. So thanks for being here today. And in fact, one of the just kind of an interesting comment that just came up here on LinkedIn is just you can't lead big changes without Prosci. And that's a great testimony for someone who, by the way, also answered that they are certified in Prosci. So I guess, maybe just to start, when you look at the Prosci program and you guys deal with these organizations all over the world, and by the way, before I get into this question, and this relates to a comment here that's on LinkedIn, you guys are you offer this on a global scale, right? As far as the training, we've got a comment here that Prosci needs to step into Africa, but I believe you can get certified from Africa. Can you not?
Yeah, Prosci has, again, humble beginnings, right? In a small warehouse in northern Colorado. Is kind of where I started. We now have a physical footprint in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Caribbean, Latin America, and Spain and Portugal. But there is an affiliate network around the entire globe where you can access ProSci training programs. So within Africa, we have several partners. And if you Google ProSci Global Partner Network, you'll track down information about CEDAR and Change, our friends that are down that way.
Great, great. So I guess just to jump into here about the problem statement that you guys are trying to solve with ProSci, and that is that change is hard in general. Or if this was easy, you and I probably wouldn't be in business. Quite frankly, you and I would probably you'd be in economics, and I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be this probably. So change is hard. Organizations struggle with it. Why is that? You've seen so many organizations, you've certified so many people that are thirsting for learning about change, but why is it such a difficult discipline?
Well, I think it gets back to that notion, and I've been talking about the two sides of the change coin, right? That there's a technical side of every change where we design, develop, and deliver a solution that meets the need, the issue, the opportunity in front of us. You do a lot of work with your clients doing ERPs, right? That's one flavor of technical solution. CRMs would be electronic health records in a hospital, merger, acquisition. Even a new value system is a technical side of a change, right? The people side of the change is how do we get people to embrace, adopt, and use whatever that solution is. And although in this change discipline, if you've been a practitioner and you hear it called the soft side of change, it just makes your skin crawl, right? Because I think the reason it's hard, Eric, is that this is the harder side of change. The technical side of change can be incredibly complex. Merging two big organizations, absolutely. There's technical complexity in terms of pulling this financial systems together, branding, blah, blah, blah. The real hard side of the change is getting people to step into this new way of working. It's helping individuals navigate, step out of where they are today, step through whatever that transition, the liminal movement is going to be, and step into that new way of being. And so I think the reason it's hard is because the people side of change is the harder side of change. Now, historically, in a value system where your employees were incented for just, asking how high when you told them to jump, predictability, consistency, that was the value system historically. Change was easier then because the values aligned with asking somebody to do something different. But new value systems over the last 20 years, the emergence of the interaction economy out of the service and knowledge economy, these things have all amplified the people side of change as something that we cannot just leave up to giving the right commands, but it's really around helping people navigate that journey. And I know we're going to end up talking about the pandemic too, but the pandemic just amplified. It made the people side of change impossible to ignore. If you were one of those organizations or projects that did ignore it and leave the people side of change to chance, historically.
Yeah. Now, because we have a global audience, it might be worth asking, a lot of those dynamics you just described, as far as the difficulty of changing and the fact that in the past, maybe you could say jump and people just say how high, and that's not so much the case in today's organizational cultures. Do you see differences in different parts of the world or just differing organizational cultures and how these ProSci concepts are applied or how they navigate change in general? Or how does that affect, either a global culture and or an organizational culture? How does that affect, your change journey?
Yeah, I think you're spot on because I think culture is critically important. I do get a little bit provocative here. I'll say that culture is never the villain when a change fails, and it's never the hero when a change succeeds. We're big Marvel fans at our house, right? So culture is neither Thanos nor Captain America. Culture is. It's the water in which we're swimming. And so I think great change practitioners, it's their job to understand, adapt, and adjust to the culture into which they're bringing to life this particular change. So I guess kind of that's my first bent. I do think culture, certainly we get geographic variation in culture, but inside of organizations, we also get tremendous variation of culture just because of the values, behaviors, beliefs. We unpacked this with research. This is kind of an interesting full circle notion of kind of the story of ProSci, where we have an attunement to the market, an understanding that change agents would like to better understand the culture they're stepping into and how it impacts the change journey they're about to attempt to navigate. And so we looked at a number of the different studies, the work that was done on organizational cultures, and came up with 6 cultural dimensions that impact how change comes to life. Because my other beef on the culture equation is that any of this kind of value laden, like good culture, bad culture, culture is, and if it's not aligned with what you're trying to achieve as an organization, then you need to go about nudging the culture. But it's so that's, I hate the good bad stuff, kind of drives me crazy. So instead we went spectrums, because change is going to come to life different, right? So you take the first one would be let's say uncertainty avoidance as a spectrum. Some organizations have a very low uncertainty avoidance, a high tolerance of ambiguity. Others have the flip side, right? Neither is good nor bad, but they impact how change comes to life. And so we built a body of research that's contained in the Prosci, body of knowledge that says for each of these 6 cultural dimensions, individualism, collectivism, what are the challenges of bringing to life change in an individualistic culture? And what are the adaptations you need to make as a change practitioner? What about for a collective culture, right? Power distance. Is the organization this high or this high in terms of the orientation of where people think they need to get permission? Neither good nor bad, but this organization requires different change tactics than this organization. And so that's what we've built out in the research, is this whole set of, for each of these dimensions, what are the challenges and adaptations you would make depending on where you live in that cultural phenomenon. Culture is going to be really fascinating going forward, I think, because I've spoke a lot in the last couple of years about the involuntary digital transformation. That's what happened in March of 2020, right? For all the talk of all the executives, of all the clients you help, right, about digital transformation leading up to March 2020, they were mostly enamored with the technological revolution. And then all of a sudden we saw the digital transformation happen during this instantaneous work from home experiment. The cultural transformation that organizations have in front of them cannot be allowed to be involuntary, right? We need to make sure that we step out in front of shaping the organizations that we want to live in and be part of as organizations going forward.
Yeah, it creates that thing that change initiatives oftentimes had historically struggled with, which is that burning platform for change. Like, if I'm an employee working for you, Tim, why do I need to change? I mean, why do we need to change? Why are you doing this to me? That sort of thing. And it sort of takes that conversation off the table and makes it a little less personal and more like we're all kind of in this together, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this new post-pandemic world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments here. One that's sort of relevant to what we were just talking about, and that is from Malcolm on LinkedIn. So his comment here is that many companies will happily spend money on consultancy and technology. And there's part 2 here, but not on education. Why? And training. How? So I guess that begs a question, or maybe I'll sort of spin that into a question that it triggered is, so companies are spending all this money on technology because they have to, or it's that involuntary transformation that you're talking about. They spend all this money, in many cases, tens of millions of dollars for a larger organization, maybe even more for a really big one. So, but they're not spending a lot of them are not spending adequate time and money on the education and the overall change management. It sort of goes back to my first question. Why is that? I mean, is it a blind spot of executives? They just don't understand anything beyond the soft side of change that you were talking about, or what do you think that dynamic is?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And to build on Malcolm's comment, the other one that we watch organizations fall into is we never find the money to spend to do it right the first time. Yeah. But we always find the money to do it the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth time. And so I think a lot of this is around getting smarter with how we're going to implement change and position change in the organization. One of the things we started to do, Eric, back in about 2013, 14, we introduced our ROI of change management, a calculator, a whole frame. But I wrote a paper one time. I never published it. I think I should. It's about, for human beings to make sense of anything, we need context and contrast. So here's a new idea that I'm trying to help you understand. Context is how does it relate to the stuff around it. Contrast is how is it similar or different to the something I already know. And I think when we talk about the value of change management, we've unfortunately done it in absence of the context of the real value it's going to create. And so we started to really work to shift this language to, I started using the phrase people-dependent project ROI. What percentage of the project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the solution? It's somewhere between 0 and 100%. And one of my biggest pet peeves in the entire world is when people use the word literally incorrectly. But if you want to watch a project leader's gears or a senior leader's gears start to turn, ask them what percentage of this project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the change. And for our most important, most strategic projects, that number is 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, right? Out of the gate. And then we can ask the second question, which is what are we investing in driving the adoption and usage of the solution? And often we have $500 for mouse pads and coffee mugs. And so we've created that cognitive dissonance, right? That so much of the value of the change depends on adoption and usage, but historically we've not right-sized our investment in supporting the adoption and usage of that change. And I think, Eric, this is, a couple of my fun turns of phrase here that I played with is getting past the head nod. So that's one, right? Because 20 years ago when Prosci was really at the beginning of that change management journey, change management was still kind of the crazies in the corner. We hadn't even got the head nod. But over the last 10, 15 years, things have certainly shifted. And so now you're like, we need some change management on this. And, oh, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. And I need an hour on the agenda. Whoa. You need an hour of my time? I told you this change management stuff sounded good, right? And so getting past the head nod is that, it sounds good until, no, you need me to do something different. And that's where we test. Are we dealing with a passive buy-in? I'm passively bought into change management, or active buy-in by that senior leader, that they're willing to take the steps and make the investment to support the adoption and usage of the change. The other positional shift that we'll work at here is, that change management's an investment, not an expense.
Yeah.
If we see it as an expense line, it gets LIFO'd all the time. And do you have any supply chain background?
Yeah.
I don't know if the audience does. LIFO is last in, first out. Or it's a way to manage inventory. It's also, unfortunately, what happens to change management on the agenda, on the budget. That if we've not anchored our value to the achievement of the project ROI, we're the last on the budget, the first off the budget, last on the agenda, first off the agenda. But as soon as we start to anchor to the percentage delivery of that project ROI, that's the position shifter. I was working with this team, Eric. So a team in an IT, right? IT project team rolling out a big project. We sat down with them and we all did the CMROI calculator. So the change management ROI calculator. We go through and you put in all of the benefits and objectives of the project, how people dependent each one is. You do this big weighting. Out at the end comes the number 62%. So the team collectively arrived at a calculation that 62% of the project ROI depended on adoption and usage. And I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on the fact that it's not 62%, right?
Fire.
Just based purely on statistics, it's more likely 61 or 63 or 60 or 64, or like just a normal distribution. But all of a sudden they had a label, right? They began talking about the 62% in meetings. How are we doing on the 62%? Do we think we're lined up? Are we ready to, do we have that part of the organization moving to make sure we capture the 62%? They had a label for this concept of the people dependent portion of the project ROI. And it unlocked the conversations. It unlocked the way that they began to intentionally engage the people in the organization, because it wasn't just a communication and a training plan anymore. It was, what do we do to make sure we capture the 62% of this transformational technology we're rolling out? And so that context shifting, I think, is where we get out of the, is it nice to have? Maybe. I also think the pandemic proved that change management is not a nice to have anymore as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It disrupted people's worlds in a way that I think a lot of people can sort of see it and feel it and understand it a little bit better. All right. Thank you, Tim. We're going to take a quick break. I've got a lot more questions for you, as does the audience. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here in the middle of a conversation with Tim Creasey from Prosci talking about the future of change management. Let's cut back to the conversation. You bring up a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of before, which is that you're talking about, hanging your hat or being able to latch onto a number like that 65%, or whatever the number is for any organization. It's X% of the business value is tied to people. And I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of organizations struggle with the inverse of that. Which is sort of what you were saying before, which is the soft nature of change management. And that a lot of times an organization will look at a hard dollar figure, like this transformation is going to cost us $10 million. Let's just say we're going to pay $10 million for new technology and a system integrator to implement it. That to them, that's a very real number. But then you start saying, well, and then we're going to spend $500,000, $1 million on change management. Then it's like, well, back to your LIFO point. Or we could cut that $1 million and only spend $10 million instead of 11. But the problem is that $10 million that's not a real number. It's a number, but that number is not going to materialize that way if you don't invest in change management. So that's the other thing too, is like, it's not just value you're trying to get. It's also even more short-sighted than that. It's like just that $10 million could quickly turn into $20 million if you don't spend that $1 million or whatever the number is on change management. And so it's like, I find too, you've got to counter that same concept you just described. You have to counter that on the cost side of other non-people aspects of the change as well. Have you seen that?
Absolutely.
Before?
Oh, for sure. Because you know what the two most costly letters in the project world are?
What?
R and E. Rescope, redesign, retrain, revisit, replatform, reteam, retreat, resign, right? When we don't think about the adoption and usage component of the solution, because there's always going to be the two sides of the coin. If we only focus on that $10 million technical solution for that digital transformation and leave the people side completely ignored, that's when it turns into a 20 or a 30 or a $40 million project with all kinds of re's, because we've only tended to this side of the coin. And both sides of the coin, we're not investing the $10 million in that technology to invest in the technology, right? There is a to what end? There is a how are we as an organization going to be different once this technology has been brought to life? And that is what depends on that people side of change, right?
Right.
The buttons work. The buttons work. It's whether or not we have become a more collaborative, integrated organization because we brought this technology to life, right?
Right. Yeah, that's very true. And the other one last thing I'll add to that is I don't know where it fits into the concept. I love that thought though, because that's absolutely true. Rescope, redo, redoing stuff costs a lot of money. But it's also like, what is the go live or the cutover to a new future state? What's that going to look like to you? Is it going to be? I guess it's a little bit different nuance from the business value that you were talking about. And this is just more, don't shut down the operations, don't screw up our time we transition, which a lot of companies do, and they don't quantify that. So if you can also quantify the risk, like if we can't ship product for a month, what does that look like? What does that do to our financial? And if you put it in that context, a lot of times especially if you can tie it back to that 65% or 75% that is driven by people, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more tangible to executives to say, well, we don't want that because we don't want to shut down operations or not ship product or not be able to close the books. Well, if you don't want to do that, you should probably invest in the people side because that's what's going to mitigate that risk largely.
Absolutely. If anybody's on LinkedIn and wants to go find, I have a Pulse article called "The Costs and Risks of Poor Adoption and Usage," and it's about a bullet list of about 400 costs and risks if we don't get the adoption and usage of the solution we need. And I've turned it into a poster. It's a really cool poster. It's like, and I tell people, I'm like, it's, the font's tiny and it's supposed to be, because the way you do is you print this out and sit down with the project leader and you say, all right, for this project, are we worried about any of these things? Attrition, unintended negative impact on customer, the loss of information, loss of, active resistance, passive resistance. There's all of those things that are part and parcel to the way the people side of change, gets executed and rolled out. Right. You want to hear one of these recost stories out of my personal life? Yeah. I got a couple of boys. They're building a new park here in Boise a number of years ago, and they put this big splash pad. Right. So these splash pads, it's hot here in Boise in the summer. And so there's water that shoots up from this big pad and the kids run around and get wet and cooled off. And so they build this park, put this huge splash pad in, and they paint it like a big, beautiful star, like a sunburst, oranges and yellows and reds. I mean, the thing is gorgeous. We show up about a week after the park opening and the water's turned off. And my oldest son, who doesn't mind running through every boundary ever set for him, goes, "Can I go talk to the guy in charge and find out why?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go for it." And he meanders up and says, "Why isn't the water turned on?" And the guy goes, "Well, it turns out the paint we used gets slippery when it gets wet." Oh, so the very first day they turn this thing on and kids are going, doosh, 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 right? Because we didn't think about the adoption and usage side of the coin. We painted it with paint. The paint was right. We hadn't thought about the adoption and usage of the solution. And so, especially in the tech space, I talk to folks, right? How often are you building a technical solution that gets slippery when it gets wet? Because you didn't actually go out and figure out when and how and where it was going to get brought to life. So, yeah. The sad thing is, I mean, talk about the recosts here, right? Now they had to scrub this thing and get all the paint off. And to this day, it's probably 6-7 years later, it is a big, ugly cement splash pad that they had to undo and back out of because they didn't think about adoption and usage when they were concocting that solution. So,
yeah, that's super interesting and a good, simple, personal case study of, and you think about that on a larger scale, without employees and instead of a splash pad, you've got some kind of fancy new system you're putting in front of them, but they can't use it, don't want to use it, doesn't fit what the needs are, whatever the case may be. And you see that all the time. Here's a that I think a lot of people might be interested in. It's more of a general question about, you've been talking a lot about your research, articles you've written. You guys obviously do a lot of research. How can people find that research? Do they follow you on LinkedIn or do you have a resource hub or something that people can go to get some of that data?
Yeah, first place you want to go is prosci.com. There's loads of free information there. There's a whole entire resource center. There is multiple days of webinar recordings. I actually was building an article. I might release it this week where I pulled 24 of my favorite webinar replays to build out essentially a literal professional development day, right? And these are all just free webinar replays. There's blogs, thought leadership articles. That's where you can access the research. And it's available in Prosci's Hub Solution Suite, which is our cloud-based tool platform. It includes tools for executing the methodology, learning tools, but then also all of the research is accessible and lives there too.
Great.
And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Yeah. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's where you'd want to find me, especially if you want these professional development day of webinars coming in the next week.
Yeah, you put out really good content. And that's, I've been following you for years now. And that's why I thought you started Prosci, because everything you put out, you've got really good stuff. So if you're not connected to Tim on LinkedIn, that's where I am most connected to you. So that seems to be a really good spot to connect with you. All right, thank you, Tim. We're going to take a quick break. I've got a lot more questions for you, as does the audience. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Relax, don't do it when you want to go to it. Relax, don't do it when you want to come. Relax.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here in the middle of a conversation with Tim Creasey from Prosci talking about the future of change management. Let's cut back to the conversation. Here's an interesting question. I get this question all the time, and I honestly struggle with this. So I'd be curious to see if maybe you have a better answer than I've had historically, which is, what does it mean to spend money on change management? What exactly should firms spend on? Is there a dollar, or not a dollar amount, but maybe a percentage of your overall budget or something that you should think about? I mean, how do you quantify that for someone who's looking for something more tangible than just go spend more?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's not kind of a common, I don't think we've standardized on what goes into the change management budget. In the research, there's some pretty good data around what components people typically put into a change management budget. It's often a team member. If it's not someone's job, it's no one's job. So a team member dedicated to driving the adoption and usage of the solution. Certainly training materials, communication materials, event, consultancy is where we actually see the dollars getting spent. We see a wide range of investment of kind of percentage of project budget spent in change management. Usually the range will come in the 10 to 20%-ish range, but of course that depends on the nature of the change, the impact, all of those components as well. Right? Because I can think of a technology, in the technology space, I can think of a huge spend on a technology project that actually has a very small people-dependent project ROI, like a purely back-end hygiene. We got to spend a lot of money, but there's really two guys whose job is going to be impacted by this technology hygiene project. So it's a huge technology spend, but there'd be a very tiny percentage that's on change management. I can also envision tons of changes that have very little technical spend, a new values system, right? Prosci, our senior leadership team, rolled out a new set of values at the beginning of 2021. There's 6 words on these 6 awesome we statements underneath each of them. That was the technical side of the solution, but the people side of that change is all, right? That it's all in behavioral mindset shift, that component. And so I don't think we can just pick a number and say what percentage. It's almost always more than we are already. And off the side of the desk is a dangerous way to resource it. So a couple of thoughts on the resource.
Have you ever met a executive or project team or an organization in general that said, you know what, we went through the transformation and there were highs and lows or whatever, but I really wish we would have spent a little bit less on change management. We overinvested in change management. We should have spent more time and money on the technology piece. Have you ever heard that in your career? Because I'm waiting to find someone who has.
Yeah, I have never yet come across the, we overdid it in terms of helping our people be ready and prepared and equipped for this. Yeah, if we would have just spent more on the technical side of the coin and less on the people side, I think, I've never ever heard anybody kind of go down that path.
And if you combine all the organizations that you and I have touched over 20 years or whatever it's been, I mean, that's a lot of organizations. That's a pretty big sample size, I'd say, not to say it doesn't exist. Maybe there's someone out there who has overspent. They wish they would have spent less. But I guess the reason I asked that question is you deal with organizations that haven't been through the process yet. And it's easy to say, well, change is different here. Yeah, I get it. Everyone else has problems with change. But here, everyone's excited about it. They want to get onto this new system. So I don't know why this is such a big deal. Why are we talking about change management? Everyone's on board. Do you get that dynamic as well, where it's sort of a blind spot that you're assuming that because your people are supportive of the project, that they're therefore not going to have problems adopting or adapting to the new changes?
Yeah, there's some, I mean, you run into a couple of these different blind spots, right? There's that one, there's the we've delivered successful change in the past. Why do we need to do it differently this time? I think I can just tell people to do it. What I think is interesting when we've been with organizations that have been on a bit of a journey, at the beginning, it's around bringing structure and intent to the adoption and usage of a particular change. Right. So often it's wrapped around that big technology transformation, a big major initiative where we realize the people side is critical enough that we're going to do something different this time. What's interesting is as organizations start to grow the muscle and it becomes repeatable, I kind of describe it like safety. You do a big manufacturing firm, then they do a big, huge safety push. And so you get all the policies, the procedures, the methodology, the protocol, the language. You got to get that stuff all embedded because eventually safety is job one, needs to be part of what everybody embraces.
Mm,
Similar to change, right? Change is everyone's job. That should be part of the moniker in the organization.
yeah.
But if we get to the point where change is everyone's job, it doesn't mean that change management goes away. It means it comes to life differently, right? It gets manifested. The practitioners of change management, the professionals of change management in the organization become more enablers than executors of the practice. They're out there, right? It's a shift towards growing change muscle as an
Mm,
organization, resilience, tenacity, flexibility, durability, where the people side of change is the expectation, not the exception, when we step into changes. But that's a long evolutionary journey to get to that point where it's really embedded into the DNA of the organization.
right. And a sort of another question from the audience here that sort of piggybacks on that thought, and it's actually too long to include here, but I'll read the rest of it to you. So it's that behavioral and cultural change relies on reinforcement's consequences instead of predecessors and triggers. So the onus falls on leaders and managers to do something different, but it's often overlooked. And the crux of his question that didn't show in the text box here is how do we flip the script in that failed projects are the fault of management, not end users? And I love that question because I think that's
Yeah.
a scary question to ask, and especially if you're an executive listening, you might not want to hear this question or the answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I go right to the research, right? This is the very first one from 1998. We asked what was the greatest contributor to successful change. And in this very first study, it was active and visible participation by our senior leaders. And in all 11 of Prosci's benchmarking studies, we've identified the number one success factor as active and visible sponsorship by our senior leaders. So it's interesting because that's not the script that you had in the chat of the end users are at fault for the failed change. That's not the script that we take to our organizations, to our clients. I mean, we get up in front of a group of senior leaders and say, hey, you all are the number one success factor and the number one obstacle to successful change. Your role in sponsoring change is beyond, it's not a title, it's a role and a responsibility. And to kind of go full circle on the Prosci story, this is where we lean back into the research because we built a research basis for what is it that senior leaders need to do to be effective sponsors of change. And out of the research came active and visible participation, build coalitions, communicate directly, what we call the ABCs of sponsorship. So now we go into the organization and say, if you organization want to be able to outchange the competition, outchange digital transformation, outchange all of the things coming at you, your leaders need to grow the muscle of being great sponsors of change,
Mm,
which means they step into fulfilling their ABCs each time. When they decide to launch a project, they know it's beyond, the funding, signing a check and signing a charter. They know that they're signing a check, signing a charter, and signing up to be active and visible participants, build coalitions, and communicate directly. And that's where this muscle, where change management goes beyond a project by project discipline and becomes an embedded part of the organizational, how the organization operates. So.
yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And then Kelly on LinkedIn has another good point, which is more of a comment than a question, but curious to get your thoughts on if you've seen this work. But one way to get leadership involved is to set up a governance body with senior leaders, and as the change lead, require discussion and sometimes training on change leadership. Slip it into the governance chartering of the change effort, which I I've always been a big believer in this whole Trojan horse approach to change management. I almost hate to use that term because it has a negative connotation, but you sort of have to. It's not even that you're misleading people in that way. It's more that you're sort of baking it in the overall DNA of the project rather than saying here, as you refer to them, these are the crazies off in the corner. They're going to be doing all the change stuff while we do all the real work over here. You gotta combine that and sort of make it part of the overall team. Have you seen that work effectively, or what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, the analogy that our CEO, Scott McAllister, uses is that change management should be there to get the Best Supporting Actor award. The
Nice.
Best Actor award always goes to the project, right? It is the initiative that senior leader put their money into bringing about. Change management's there to get the Best Supporting Actor award, to help you achieve what you already signed up to deliver faster and more completely than you thought you're going to be able to anyways. And so I think that's really the notion of how do we help our senior leaders realize that investing in change management is an investment in delivering what they already promised to deliver, by addressing those, again, the biggest detractors of them delivering what they deliver. One of our other favorite clients, it's a state government here in the US. We had the COO come and speak to a company-wide meeting at Prosci last year. And her analogy that she uses is change management's like the water on the water slide. Like the dynamics of a slide is that you're going to end up at the bottom. Like this ERP is going to get rolled out no matter what. But do you want to go down the water slide without water, or do you want to put something in there to help ease that journey that people are going to be on? So,
Right.
we also have clients that'll build sponsor contracts. I mean, sit down with a sponsor, and the sponsor contract has 3 parts: why your role matters, what you can expect from me, and what I need from you. But it's really around establishing that expectation up front that change management's not something else. It is what you need senior leader to deliver on the promise of your most important initiatives.
Right. Yeah, that's a great sort of a capstone point, which is, how do you bake it into the project, and how do you make it sort of not a nice to have, like you mentioned before, not a bunch of crazies off in the corner, but more of a core integral part of your overall transformation. All right, thanks, Tim. Really good conversation. There's a lot we covered there, a lot we didn't cover. I could have easily spent another hour or two asking more questions, as the audience could as well, from what I could tell here. So I thank you for that really engaging conversation, and certainly thank you to the audience for all the great questions that you had. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Kyler and I are going to talk more about some of these topics we talked about with Tim and build on some of them and unpack some further conversations. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. We just had Tim Creasey from Prosci on the show, talking about the future of change management and a bunch of other stuff. We had a lot of different types of questions related to change management. Really good conversation. I enjoyed that a lot. What did you think about the conversation there, Kyler?
Oh yeah, I think I took 6 pages of notes.
Nice.
What an insightful conversation, and really normalizing the conversation of how important the human component is within technology. I love his quote, the buttons work, but the people don't. I wrote that down. and really understanding the root cause behind user adoption, and understanding what that frontline experience is kind of holistically full circle. And I love that they have this research of this discipline of the human component, instead of just saying, like, it's important to consider how people feel. They actually show the impact of the all over ROI if you don't consider how people feel.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. Actually, there's a lot I learned about Prosci that I didn't know until this conversation, and also the prep leading up to today's podcast. I didn't know it was started by an engineer. I didn't realize how much research they do. And one thing, I've talked to Tim before, but never in that level of detail that we did today. And we were all over the place. I had a bunch of random questions that were sort of all over the place within Change, and the audience had a lot of different questions. And I love talking to Tim, and I love that he can quickly go up kind of strategically up and call it up in the clouds, but he can quickly kind of get down to tangible, pragmatic answers or discussion points and then back up. So that takes a rare skill set, and I think it's probably indicative of partly his personality, but also his job, what he does as Chief Innovation Officer there at Prosci. So it's pretty fascinating. And again, I like it because one of the things that drives me crazy about change management is when people view change as sort of a hands-off, like, I'm going to tell you how you need to change, but I'm not actually going to tell you how you need to change. I'm certainly not going to help you through it. I'm just going to give you some high-level guidance and that sort of thing. And I do think there is, we didn't talk about it with Tim, but I do think there's a trend in the consulting space where it seems like I'm seeing more and more change people that they'll go get the Prosci certification, they'll go learn all this deep subject matter expertise around change management, but then when it comes to the way they advise their clients, it's more of a hands-off advisory role. And I think to be effective in change management, you have to be really hands-on, you have to be pragmatic, you have to roll up your sleeves and understand the operations and the strategy and all the pitfalls and warts within the organization, all that stuff. So I found that fascinating for sure.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because I also wrote down culture is the water in which we are swimming. And so each organization needs their own unique tactics or their own unique water on the water slide, right?
Yeah.
To be able to really incorporate what that means. And I like that he wasn't like, and we're big Marvel people too. You should see our basement. It's painted Marvel. So when it comes to is not the Thanos or not the, Captain America, I'm like, well, maybe he's like the Doctor Strange, which is like, the mind control stuff,
Right.
and, that type of thing. So, but I digress, because it really is about identifying, like you said, what is the company culture, that's not the end all be all. That should be a factor within the overall strategies, but that's not going to essentially make or break. But you can't do the transformation or implement the technology without the water on the water slide. So I thought that was, a really important piece of showing holistically how everything should be grouped together. And if something is off or something is not meeting the exact needs of the business, or those cookie cutter approaches that we talk about all the time, that's not going to be effective. It's about that organization, that DNA, and how do we make sure we optimize the strengths and weaknesses of that company. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. I certainly have never shared it on this podcast, and I usually don't share it in public settings, but I have a terrifying fear of water. I don't know how to swim. I hate the water. So that was the only thing I didn't like about what he said was the water slide, because water slides freak me out. And I'll do it with my kids if I have to, but I don't enjoy it. But the reason I bring this up is it reminded me, partly because of my fear of water, reminded me of this, that I wanted to go a different direction in that analogy. But it reminds me of a few episodes ago, we had Jed Hafer on the show, and he was talking about how culture is like the weather outside, which I like that one a little bit better just because, again, of my personal fear of water. But they're both good analogies, though. Like it's the water slide, and the way you get down the water slide, is it going to hurt your back? Or is there going to be a lot of friction, or are you going to have water that sort of gets you down there faster? And same with the weather analogy. If is your culture one that's icy, snowy, treacherous conditions, or is it sunny and warm on a beach? And that's sort of like, that's your environment, and then you've got to figure out how you're going to navigate the transformation within it. I also liked how Tim talked about how I really liked how he talked about how culture is not good or bad, and it drives him crazy when you say it's a good or bad culture. I totally agree with that. I think you can, every culture has its strengths, the things that support its strategy, and then there's also its warts and the things that undermine its overall strategy. that you've got to address, but it's not necessarily a matter of good or bad. It's sort of like, when it's snowing outside, you may not like it. It may not be ideal, but that's the weather, and you're going to figure out how to get to work or, wherever you're going based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny that you can see that because I feel like people from Colorado, which Tim is too. I went to CSU, so I was up in northern Colorado, Colorado State. I don't like water either. And I always tell people it's because I'm from like a landlocked state.
Yeah.
We're not, that's not who we are. Like we'll go out in the snow, that's cool, but the water piece of it. And I love the splash pad analogy too, just because obviously I have two young kids that are huge fans of the splash pad. And our splash pad at our park has these treacherous stairs up to this very high cliff that actually has this gate that swings open. And some of my other friends and I will talk about who would ever design a gate that opens onto the side of a cliff for, pre-K kids that are playing in the splash pad. So that too reminded me, like, we didn't think all of this through. We didn't think of the end user impact when we built this structure. So I don't know what it is about splash pads that aren't really thinking that through. But if you're a splash pad designer out there, I really encourage you to maybe go through some training with Tim here and his team.
Right. There's an opportunity for improvement for sure, it sounds like, in this whole industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the everything wrong starts with RE, that redesign, that rescope, that re-engagement. And really, it's so important to be able to tell that to business leaders in that context versus contrast. Our ROI depends on that user adoption. So what are we doing as business leaders to invest in that user adoption so we don't have to go through those failures of the re's? And I thought that was really well put.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good reminder, too, that he made a comment somewhere in there in that discussion about the re's. He was talking about how it's a lot cheaper. He said something along the lines of it's cheaper to do things just one time versus having to rework and whatnot. And it's a good reminder. It's very true. And it gets back to that point I made about the $10 million budget proposal that a vendor puts in front of you, and it becomes real in your mind because it's on paper and the vendor told me it's going to be $10 million. But if I have to do the rework and the redesign, or I have to do things twice and go back and fix stuff, it's going to cost me a lot more than $10 million. So that you have to be careful that you're not too enamored by a number you want to hear or one that you think is real when you've got other things that could drive that cost up or down or whatever.
Absolutely. And I even love how some of our audience were talking about how you can position that cost and risk of low user adoption or end user penetration as almost an insurance. And we kind of see that trend right now with COVID-19 and things like travel or something, buying those additional insurance just in case something does happen so that you do mitigate the risks of that type of process. And I think that's just a great scenario to kind of think about change management like that, as it is an insurance policy to make sure that your investment is effectively activated.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, back to that $10 million example, it's not going to be $10 million if you don't invest in change management effectively. If you don't invest in change management, it's probably going to, potentially double or maybe even more. And so that's the way to look at it. And, it's on one hand, it's easy to say, well, if I cut X amount of budget or X amount of resources from my change management, that's going to save me time and money. Well, it's actually not. It's going to cost you a lot more to implement if you don't invest in change management. And when you get to the other side of your transformation and you flip the switch on new technologies and processes, you're going to disrupt the operations. And that impact people don't talk about very often, but that impact of lost sales, the customer service impact, the employee impact, not being able to close the books, all that stuff, that's hugely costly. And most of the time, that's exponentially more than the money you spent on the implementation if you do it wrong. So change management is a way to sort of mitigate all that risk, the initial cost of the deployment as well as what happens on the other side.
Yeah, definitely. And right now, with our current landscape of just customer tolerance and behavior, if you are in a highly competitive industry, they're not coming back, after they have a bad experience. we have, the customer-led behavior is going to go to a competitor or a different route to get whatever good and service you want. And with the amplification of customer experience on things like the internet, then that's, maybe that's one customer that had the experience, but it's, 200 that heard about it, type of thing.
Right.
It has a huge rippling effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something I wanted to ask you about, Eric, was the sponsor contracts that he talked about. I thought that was a really interesting initiative. So basically having a contract, if you will, with that project sponsor or the manager or the leader or whatever to the actual employee to say, like, okay, we're going through this change, but this is my commitment to you through this change. And it's not just all about what you do. It's about how we work together as a team. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of, or perspective to look at how you can create some accountability and security on the, frontline employee side too.
Yeah, and having that clarity of expectations too is part of that project governance, the project planning, the resourcing, all that stuff. And that, it's a good example of things that organizations sort of gloss over. They don't spend a lot of time doing. So that's a good reminder that he talked about, that you do need to spend time doing that so that people are all on the same page and they know what it means to affect change. They know what their expectations are, or what the expectations are for them during the transformation, either as a project team member, a stakeholder, or change agent, whatever your role is.
Absolutely. And really that is failed. Like he said, failure is the fault of the managers, not the end users. And I think that's so important of people think you can just flip the switch and these employees or these frontline workers will do whatever you say. Well, maybe they will, but it's not essentially their fault if that trickle down strategy isn't activated.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Well, good stuff. I really hope that you have Tim back at some point. And it was just great analogies and definitely very articulate and easy to understand why the data behind change management is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great discussion. I would love to have him back on because, like I said, I had a whole list of questions. I might have gotten through half of them. There's probably more than that I didn't get to. And there's a ton of audience questions we didn't get to just because there's so much that people wanted to know. And you could tell there's a craving for information and a craving for good guidance on this topic. And like I said, he's a thought leader in the space. He's well known. He's got the name recognition. So it's great to have him on the show, and I appreciate him being here. And hopefully we'll have him back here soon. So, well, that's great. And speaking of guests, that was Tim's first time on our podcast, but we're going to have a repeat guest here next after a break. We're going to have Adam Cheatham, who you know very well because you're married to the guy. He's also, in addition to being your husband, he's a director of strategy and transformation at Third Stage. And he's going to be on the show talking about system and technology integration. So a bit of a shift of gears from Tim's change management discussion to Adam's focus on systems and technologies and integration. So we'll have Adam on the show. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and you can find new episodes every Wednesday on all the audio podcast platforms, as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. We just had Tim Creasey from Prosci on the show. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about systems and technology integration with Adam Cheatham. And this is actually a interview that you did with him, Kyler, for our Digital Stratosphere podcast, our sister podcast. I guess first of all, I have to ask, how is it interviewing your husband? Is that weird? Is it hard? Do you guys Does he get
Yeah.
mad at you, the stuff you ask after the fact or before the fact? Like, what's that like? What's the behind the scenes story of a
Well,
wife
maybe
interview?
you should interview our very talented and beautiful CFO and see how
Yes.
that goes. No,
You know,
but
I've been trying for years to
yeah,
get her to show up on a video somewhere, and she just will not do it. She's had a couple cameos if you look carefully at like our blooper
yeah,
video, and I
yeah,
think there's one other video she shows up in, but she has no more than 5 seconds of camera time. But this is a little bit different though. You've got the actual because I don't have that experience with my spouse. I'm just curious
yeah,
what it's
yeah.
like.
No, it's I think we're used to it at this point, but he's much more serious than I am. So he gets in this like persona that like he has to be like right to the point. Like I was joking with him because I had on a shirt that actually says we wore at our wedding and it says just married on the back. So I wanted him to put his on too because I thought like wouldn't that be so cool? And he just was like absolutely not. I mean, so it
Trying to
just
be
shows that
professional here.
yeah, the difference of our personality. I always joke with him when we go into the office. I'm like, okay, do you want me to wait like 5 minutes? Because he gets like all worried, that he's gonna look unprofessional. I'm like, you know, we're married, right? Like it's not. We
That's
have 2 kids, so
that's
it's
really
not a
funny.
secret.
I just asked you the other day. You were here with him, and I asked because you had a nanny situation, timing issue with a meeting we had, and I asked you, did you guys drive together? And I didn't mean anything by it, but now that you're telling me the story, I should make sure I ask that more often. Like, oh, you guys drove together? That's weird.
Yeah,
Even though you're
yeah,
married, that's still it's super
definitely.
unprofessional, Adam, that you would drive in with your wife. I'll have to give him a hard time about that.
Yeah, that will get him all like, rustle the feathers. But that's just, Adam's personality. That's why he's great at his job because he is so, matter of fact and analytics. So
And focused, very focused
I
on
like,
clients.
yeah, right. But I enjoyed this conversation with him. It was the 2021 trend series. So he spoke on integration as that's been a main trend earlier in January. And I thought it was a nice pairing with Tim, true, because it just showcases the business as a whole and really how it has to function in a strategic capacity altogether. And I felt like that was a good pairing with kind of what Tim was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like this is talking about technology integration, obviously, but Tim was talking about human and organizational integration. That's essentially what change management is often. So it might be a stretch, but I'm trying to help connect the dots there between the
Thanks.
two
Thanks.
discussions. Well, cool. Well, let's just cut to the interview of you talking to Adam Cheatham about system and technology integration. Let's cut to the interview here.
So this month we are talking about all trends of 2022 when it comes to your digital transformation. So today we are going to talk about integration and kind of unpack a basic definition of integration and then also go into why it is a main trend that we're seeing in 2022. So Adam, can you start by giving us kind of a basic definition of integration and kind of the types of projects it involves?
Yeah, so an integration is a point between two software systems that don't share the same code. That's the easiest way of describing it. Where we run into integrations in software on the whole is when you have a good example at least, is when you have one software provider who supplies one software system that you need and another software provider who provides a different system that you need. And when you need those two systems to talk to each other and share data and information, you do that through an integration. So an integration becomes an interface between those two systems that allows them to speak to each other and share data.
And are there different types of integration? You had mentioned data right there. Are there other types?
Yeah, well, there are all kinds of different types of integrations, yes, and they're all defined by what the method of integration is. But the way I think is most appropriate to think of an integration and the types of integrations that there are between the two things that you're integrating. So you may integrate two databases, and that's one different type of an integration than having two systems integrate, because two databases need to share the same exact fields in similar ways so that they can act more jointly as a single source of truth, and the data becomes just something that tells you a fact about something. It's a piece of data, a data element. Integrations between systems are a bit more active, and the data flows between them. as opposed to being a point-to-point connection. You have more of an interwoven connection where more pieces of information are flowing through that integration, and they're going in typically going in both directions.
That makes sense. So is there certain industry types or business types that heavily rely on integrations over others?
I'd say that not particularly from a perspective of industry, but there are certain decisions that you can make along the way that will make you more oriented towards integrations or an integrated best of breed environment, or a single integrated environment within one system. So the overall goal of a digital transformation should be to have a system or subset of systems that accomplishes all of your business's needs within one environment. So we would like those that integration allows for that sharing of an environment. Whereas with a best of breed, you find that you end up with more software packages. And that's okay. Sometimes you have more needs in specific areas, and that has more to do with the complexities of each individual business than it does the size of the industry. So to kind of give you an idea of the way that it looks is you have different tiers of software. You have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 ERP systems. Tier 1 systems do just about everything under the sun. These are the Oracle ERP clouds, the SAP S/4HANAs, the Microsoft Dynamics Finance and Operations, or Supply Chain and Operations, as I believe they're calling it today. Those types of tier 1 systems, M4, M3 is often considered a tier 1 system as well, that are made to do everything. They're very large, they're very complex software systems that become very expensive and difficult to implement. So the largest and most complex businesses tend to end up in tier 1 systems, right? As you kind of start to get smaller as a business, as we move down the scale towards smaller business sizes, you have tier 2 systems that are kind of a medium-sized software. They're made to do most things, but allow for some decision making on the whole. That is, some tier 2 systems do things better than in certain functional areas than others. These are the NetSuites of the world. Epicor is a tier 2 system. Infor has some tier 2 systems. Cloud Suite Industrial, for example, is one of theirs. Microsoft Business Central. All of these smaller software systems that are a bit less complex in their nature and a little bit simpler to implement, but have less functionality. So if you find that you are a medium-sized business that has fairly vanilla needs, you're probably going to get away with everything out of the box in a tier 2 system for the most part. If you are the same size company, but you have a very unique set of needs in one particular functional area. I once had, for example, a client who had radioactive isotopes as part of their inventory, and tracking the half-lives of those was a difficult thing for them. That's the type of scenario where you have a complex need that is unique to a particular business that requires some type of additional conversation. With them, the question became, can we get away with a tier 2 system and some type of an add-on to manage that inventory, maybe an advanced warehousing system, something like that? Or do we go with a tier 1 system that provides more broad and comprehensive coverage? The first example being one that is going to require integrations with other products. The second being an example of the same scenario, same company that could end up in a single software system that is more complex and covers those needs more effectively. As you go down to tier 3 systems, you find more common that they focus in a particular area, whether it's finance or QuickBooks is a tier 3 system. They do finance. Fishbowl is a tier 3 warehousing system that just focuses on warehousing. Those types of activities that now you're a smaller company, Maybe you don't have advanced needs in any functional areas except maybe one or two. So you find yourself piecing together your software systems, and every time you have one system and a second system that need to talk, you have an integration point. So that smaller company has the option to go best of breed and have a series of integrations, or go tier 2, which may be more expensive, it may be less expensive, but it's going to include a more comprehensive package. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very comprehensive answer to my question. And I appreciate you kind of taking us through all of those tiers. We're going to get to best of breed in just a second. My last question, just kind of on a basic definition, is how do your clients prepare for an integration project? What are some basic infrastructures? If someone in our listener community is considering this option, what are some things they can do today to make sure that they're going to be successful?
That's a great question. And the first thing that you need to do today is understand what your needs are and where you're at with that. If you're thinking about a best in breed environment that has a series of integrations, know that those integrations need to be managed. That's one of and that's an active management thing. That's one of the disadvantages of a best in breed environment, in that it's a more actively managed thing. So as a business, knowing yourself and knowing where it is your needs are, so that you can balance the thought of taking on extra IT hours from a perspective of managing those integrations. That's an important part. The second part is to know what systems you're trying to replace, and how many of them you can replace, and just as importantly, which software systems are going to stay. No matter whether you buy a tier 1 system that does everything, or a tier 2 system, or a tier 3 system that allows you to be more targeted in your functional areas, it's not common that one system replaces all existing systems. So some things that are going to need to stay in place, as you know what needs to stay in place, that should tell you how it is you need to be integrated. So that's the second thing that you need to understand, is what stays and what goes, so you know where your integration points are. The third thing that I would suggest you start looking at is how clean is your data, and how good have you been about maintaining it and keeping it healthy. If you pass bad data in through an integration, you're going to scramble everything that happens within the system. All those workflows are going to be more or less worthless until your data flows through them accurately. So getting your data cleaned up and knowing where that's at is from a health perspective is another important piece. And then the last thing from an integration perspective of what a client who's considering this type of a path should do is just understand that integrations aren't a bad thing. They're just a thing. There aren't very many ERP software systems, for example, that do sales tax calculations, and there aren't very many ERP systems that do payroll calculations. It just is that way. So if you're thinking about upgrading software systems to something that doesn't do sales tax calculations, but your system does that today, you just added an integration point with a software like maybe an Avalara or something like that. And the same holds true for payroll and HR type of packages like ADP, for example.
Excellent. I think that makes a lot of sense to kind of back up and really identify what your needs are as an organization. And then potentially, move forward in understanding those really important integration points.
All right, thanks, Kyler and Adam. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation and continue the clip. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Bad. Bad to the bone.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. I'm here playing a clip with Adam Cheatham and Kyler Cheatham talking about system and technology integration. So let's cut back to the conversation.
So Adam, it seems like we're seeing a shift in clients going from a more core ERP comprehensive system to actually looking at evaluating and a lot of times implementing a best of breed option. So can you just basically explain why that might be some shifting within our overall scope here as a digital transformation industry?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think that the first three things that come to mind for me are from a trending perspective that needs to be talked about. The first is the ways that integrations are managed, especially as the move towards the cloud is continues to grow, and software as a service platforms continue to grow. So integrations in those types of spaces is one important key factor to talk about, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. The next is the maturity of the frontline ERP packages. 10 years ago, the top three tier one systems were fairly mature in their space. And so all of the things that could be developed had mostly been developed over time. It takes time, the same way it takes time to fill a house, it takes time to fill a software package with functionality. And what we're doing in the industry these days is we're seeing the old SAP ECC6 has given way to SAP S/4HANA, which is has been in the market for I think it's about 8 years now, which is not very long for a software system, especially when you consider that sometimes SAP takes 5 years to implement, right? So the first person to implement on that may still have only been live for 3 years. Oracle is moving away from the Enterprise Business Suite platform towards ERP Cloud, and Microsoft is moving away from the Microsoft Dynamics AX platform of the old days to a Microsoft Dynamics 365 platform, and all of these are being moved to the cloud. Think of it as they're all moving into new houses, and now they're filling those new houses with things. Those things being functionality within these new software packages. So that's the second thing that's important to think about when we talk about integrations. And now I'm drawing a blank on what my third was going to be. So give me just a second. There's a platform as a service, the integrations themselves. Oh, and the third thing that is driving a lot of that is as our clients find they have more specialized needs in one way or another, particularly as the e-commerce movement that has been inspired by COVID continues to roll. You find some clients that want a very specific, more niche system that might not be ERP. It might be an MES, manufacturing execution system, a CRM, an advanced warehousing system, and they want to just replace that piece of their business to get more digital, and that requires an integration. Right? So on the first of those, should I keep going, or do you want to go through them one at a time and ask about them?
I was just going to ask kind of that there seems to be a call for flexibility within software. So you can continue on your answer there, or if you want to move on to the next question, you just let me know for your train of thought.
Can you talk to me about ask me about the different ways and ways that integrations are being presented, the integration options that are available in the marketplace today as the market shifts towards platforms as a service?
Okay. Are you ready to finish that last question?
Yes.
We can just cut it at your last one.
Yep.
That's really fascinating, Adam. And so what are the different types of integrations for, say, software as a service options?
Yeah. So in the past, when we had, the way of going to things was an on-premise set of servers that your IT department managed. Your IT department wrote the code that goes between that connects two systems. So they wrote the integrations themselves. You hear them referred to as APIs or anything like that. Where the general nature of it is, it's a custom coded translation between two systems, and that integration is something that continues to need to be managed. And that management of that integration is on your IT team because you built it and you maintain it. What we're starting to see a shift towards is what's called an integration platform as a service. What this is a third-party provider who creates an integration between two well-known systems that provider then manages. So that service that they're providing you includes the integration between two systems. A good example of this is the integrations between NetSuite and Shopify. That's typically handled by a third-party provider. Often somebody called Celigo is a good example of one of those, where Celigo owns proprietary software services that translate between Shopify and NetSuite. So what happens with that is you buy NetSuite, you buy Shopify, and you buy the Celigo integration platform as a service, and you pay a monthly fee for that. And Celigo is responsible for now maintaining the connection between those two systems and making sure that they talk to each other appropriately. So as we see that shift towards the cloud and software as a service, we're also seeing a growth in the integration platforms as a service on the whole. So it has some benefits in that you don't have to manage that integration. It's always handled by somebody else. It can become pricey.
So knowing the connectivity of these systems are really pivotal, obviously, to be able to garner insights and actionable data. Do you think that this integration kind of multi-system infrastructure is a main theme that will continue for businesses? Or do you feel like we'll go back to more of an ERP, not as complex system of all kinds of systems talking to each other after we say maybe over integrate our software systems?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'd say that both of those things are going to happen.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you're always going to have the needs of the more niche-based needs that drive a best-of-breed scenario, whether or not comprehensive functionality in one system is available. What that means is that there will always be businesses that have specialized needs and functions. Where buying one smaller niche package to integrate with your existing ERP is a better business decision than buying a whole brand new ERP on the whole. Taking small bites is usually the best way to do this. As you start to grow as an organization, if your core ERP is working, but you have a new specialized need, maybe you've taken on a new business unit or a new line of business, a new product line or something like that. It may make more sense, and for a lot of companies, it always will, to add a smaller new system and those integrations that come with it. So that piecemeal functionality in that third example I gave earlier, that leads to more of a piecing together of different functions, starts to become an option for some of those clients that haven't grown into the full-blown next tier of enterprise software. But on the flip side, the second example I gave of why integrations are trending right now is just that those top tier systems, they're not comprehensive yet. They're about as comprehensive as they can be right now. But what happens is you have a software system that somebody builds, an SAP S/4HANA or Oracle ERP Cloud or something like that, and that software package is launched. It's launched with fairly comprehensive functionality, but as it's implemented at new places, new code is written into it. I have a new client that needs this specific function out of this tier 1 ERP. So we're going to build that. And now that that's been built, that becomes code that's accessible and functionality that's accessible to new clients, right? So as I have clients that have new needs that haven't been built in the software, and I decide as an ERP provider to add that functionality to the software, the comprehensiveness of my software package grows. This is how the EBS is, the ECC6 is, the Dynamics AX packages got to become comprehensive. It's not like they were launched and then remained static for the 20 years that they were live and available. They continued to grow, as the systems of today will continue to do. SAP S/4HANA will continue to grow its functionality and continue to become more comprehensive. Same with Oracle ERP Cloud, same with Microsoft, Epicor, Infor, even down into the tier twos. Those software packages will become more comprehensive. And as they do that, the need to integrate other tools with them to fill gaps will be reduced by the fact that those have been newly coded into those systems. So we'll see it kind of go in both directions, but from what I see in the marketplace, that's going to take some time. It takes decades to get to that full-fledged functionality, based on enough clients needing that one piece of functionality to make it worth pulling into the core flagship product.
Gotcha. And so I'm curious how software vendors feel about the sale maybe of a best of breed system versus a core ERP, and then the integration and the relationship to that. Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, so the software vendors are usually more worried about selling their own software, and if having an integrated product that's strong helps them do that, then they're usually willing to do it. It's when we release RFPs to software vendors, we coach our clients through the expectation that it's probably going to be more than one product that's suggested. There may be some add-ons in there that we'll continue to scope and keep an eye on, and determine what the level of need is for on those. So as we see that space grow, I don't see it as those ERP providers seeing the third-party bolt-ons in the best of breed scenario as necessarily competitive in a negative way. A lot of times it helps them sell their software to folks that they wouldn't otherwise if they didn't have the advantage of a third-party partner that they can integrate with.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know, most of our conversation here has been about kind of the technical side of integration. I wondered, and just like stay with me here, if integration could kind of be somewhat of a metaphor for a company culture of collaboration, because I would assume that it takes additional kind of cross-cultural or cross-dynamic department communication to make sure that these integrations are being successful. Is that something that you kind of see with that?
Yeah, I'd say that you could apply that analogy to integrations for sure, because you got to know which system passes what data to another and how they interact to each other. And because they're usually different functions, it does involve two business units trying to figure out how to make those two systems play well together. I would say that is that collaborative need internally on that from a business perspective isn't isolated to the idea of integrations. I'd say that it should be you should be collaborating across business units as you think about process improvements that may reduce the need for integrations, as well as change management tactics that lead us to hopefully discover whether or not we need an integration or not. And those types of conversations that collaboratively help you make decisions, good, strong decisions as an organization. But when you're going to have two systems and you need to integrate the two of them, having both ends of those business units talk about the process holistically and how it is the 2 or 3 or 5 or however many integrated systems need to act. It's important to include all of the impacted stakeholders.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and providing some insight on this really interesting trend. You'll be talking more at Digital Stratosphere about some other business intelligence and some 2022 trends. Can you give us a little preview of some of the things you'll be speaking about?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and I can give you a little preview, but I'm not going to tell you too much. But we're going
A teaser, if you will.
So we'll be talking a little bit about what technology means for your business. I think is the easiest way of putting it. I mean, we'll cover all of the topics that are important to that conversation and what is digital transformation, how do you become successful in it. We'll talk about integrations. We'll talk about the market as it pertains to the global nature of it, whether it's the difference between markets in the U.S., U.K., Australia, and Africa, where we have offices in each of those locations, or some of the other differences in markets, and maybe Latin America and Asia as well. We'll also talk about what it means to have a best of breed scenario versus an ERP centric, single system scenario. So lots of really strong content. It is all complementary. Tons and tons of learning opportunities for our guests. So we're looking forward to having as many people as may benefit from it.
All right, thank you, Adam and Kyler. Great conversation, a lot to unpack there. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back with more Transformation Ground Control, we'll talk about and build on some of the topics we covered here in that video. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 55. We just had a great episode, or a great discussion here with Kyler and Adam talking about system and technology integration. What were your thoughts on that discussion after you recorded that for our other podcast, Digital Stratosphere? What were some of your takeaways from that conversation, Kyler?
Yeah, I think I always think things are easier on the actual implementation side than they actually are. So these sort of conversations, I'm like, oh, isn't it so great that you can have the best of the best supply chain management system and the best of the best CRM, and really look at all of these different systems, and then you can just flip a switch and integrate them. And this conversation was a big learning experience of like, that's not how that works exactly. Like, that is possible, but just all of the logistics, the data management, the data has to match or it doesn't mean anything, and going through the integration of these systems. And that sometimes, though that sounds like a really Cinderella story approach, it's not as easily said than done. In like, you select a best of breed system and then all of a sudden you can have it integrated with the rest of your business. So it's just kind of a reminder that there's a lot more that goes into that when you are evaluating kind of what your software and strategy will look like in considering integration and those best of breed type of models.
Well, if it's any consolation, a lot of our clients have that same blind spot or challenge. They think it's going to be a lot easier. And this, keep in mind, this whole topic that you were talking about is technology integration, and it's not easy, but it's easier than process or people, unpredictable process and people components of a transformation. So if you assume that the technology piece is the easier of the people process technology pieces, and even that is more difficult than most expect, you can only imagine what the people and process changes and difficulties must be.
Absolutely. And I learned that a lot of times if the processes don't match, that's an issue too when it comes to integration. So that's another consideration when you are going through that overall transformation, is just understanding what kind of the end strategy or the end user is going to experience when implementing an integration. That needs to be considered, as Adam stated, before you decide, hey, I'm just going to buy a best of breed, HCM system, and then we'll figure out how to connect it to all of our other systems later. Well, no, that should be considered up front in those requirements, and I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's part of that sort of blueprinting process. You kind of lay out what the overall technology blueprint's going to be, how everything's going to tie together, what that architecture is. Same with the business processes. You want that blueprint laid out. And then also the organizational design and the culture and the future state people side of things. So that all that combined is sort of your overall architecture, if you will, for the entire organization, what it's going to look like going forward. So it's all really important.
Yeah, and Adam was talking about kind of that pain point of explaining that to clients. Like, we need to still map out every one of your processes in order to help you evaluate the most effective technology. And the ironic part is, when I was scheduling him for a podcast, I wanted him to talk about open source systems, and he openly refused. For that very nature is, a lot of times clients come to him and like, you could do all of these different things with these different modules. And he's like, that's true, but you need to consider what type of business decision, resources, support that you need for that overall decision making. It doesn't matter the software. If you don't know what your processes are or what your data looks like, you could buy any software you want, but it's not going to work the way that you want it to.
Yeah, I've found with Adam that one of his triggers is open source, as he mentioned. I find that if I just ask him like, hey, what are your thoughts on open source? Or I'll pick a client that has no business deploying any sort of open source technology. It's not at all a fit, but I'll ask him just to kid with him. Like, hey, what do you think about open source for that client? And I know it's going to be a trigger for him. So it's always a fun bantering we have around that.
Yeah, definitely. But you know what? A valid point is his job and our team's job is to advise for what's best for the business. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I assume, and you would know better than I, but these fancier terms like integration and open source and flexibility in systems, though we do know that kind of seems like a trend that the industry is headed in, that doesn't mean that that's what's best for the business processes you have today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's a good fit for one organization might be a terrible fit for another. So having sort of a one-size-fits-all generic answer is always risky at best.
Yeah, and it always is kind of a good reminder to our audience community or any organization that's going through or considering going through a digital transformation. Like, there is homework, pre-work, if you will, to do on your side, which Third Stage can certainly help with, but it is a main failure point if you don't understand your data, if you don't understand your future state, if you don't, really lay out your target operating model and really have that visibility to what that's going to look like, then it doesn't really matter the software you select or the strategies you implement, because you don't understand what you have today or what you want tomorrow. Yeah,
agreed.
Excellent. Well, he always enjoys being on the podcast. Not really. No, he doesn't. He prefers his day job, which is good for our clients. But it was good to kind of talk to him about that. And just a reminder for our sister podcast, we do have a 2022 trend series that I did with a variety of our experts, of whether we were talking about data management, small business solutions, target operating models. We did one on too. So please head over there and subscribe if you'd like some smaller, more short form type of podcast episodes.
Yeah, and you can find that Digital Stratosphere, the shorter form podcast episodes, you can find that on the Third Stage YouTube channel. And you can also find it by just searching Digital Stratosphere or Kyler or my name on whatever audio podcast platform you're listening. You'll find it there, as well as this podcast. If you're not already listening on one of the audio podcast platforms, you can check it out here. Or you can check it out by searching for Transformation Ground Control. Also, be sure to follow us on social media, too. If you follow our LinkedIn accounts, our Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff, you'll find lots of good content we put out every day, as well as our website with new blogs and white papers and articles and all that good stuff. So be sure to check all that out. If you just can't wait till the next episode, which will be a week from today, on Wednesday of next week, we'll have our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, be sure to check out all these other sources we're sharing with you here. So I want to thank you for your time, Kyler, and thanks to the audience for their great questions and engagement here in today's episode, as well as our two guests, Adam Cheatham and Tim Creasey from Prosci. Thanks for being here. Thanks to those two guests, and I'm sure we'll have them both on at some point in the future. So hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Have a great day and a great week ahead in the meantime. Take care.